I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.
Hello there! Price of Reason here with a movie review. You may not remember this, but there was a time when Disney was able to produce movies that were wholesome, family-friendly, and appealed to a mass audience of all ages. Their 2007 modern-day fairy tale movie Enchanted is a perfect example of this. For those who haven't seen it, that movie tells the story of Giselle, an animated princess-to-be who ends up teleported as a human being into real-world New York City by the wicked stepmother of her fiancé prince. By the end of that movie, she ends up staying in New York with Patrick Dempsey and his daughter in what appears to be their happily ever after. Since the original Enchanted movie ends in a rather definitive and satisfying way, it was never an obvious candidate for a sequel, especially after 15 years. However, in our day and age when Hollywood and Disney are too busy peddling trendy agendas and less busy thinking about new creative ideas, I suppose it was only a matter of time before an unnecessary sequel was made. This is how we got the movie Disenchanted. Disenchanted continues Giselle's story several years after the events of Enchanted. With the birth of their new daughter, Sophia, Giselle and Patrick Dempsey decide to move the family out of New York City and into a suburb. But suburban life isn't all that it's cracked up to be, especially for Morgan, Patrick Dempsey's daughter, who's a teenager now and having trouble fitting into her new school. Giselle tries to help Morgan by wishing that they have a fairy tale life, but her wish backfires, the town radically changes, and she gradually turns into a wicked stepmother. In a race against time, Giselle has to break the spell and bring herself and the town back to normal. As usual, I will discuss what I liked about this movie and then what I didn't like. Number 1. Amy Adams. These days, when most of us think of Amy Adams, we think of a universally praised and well-respected actress with an impressive resume of quality films, but when Enchanted came out in 2007, most people didn't know who she was. Similarly to Will Ferrell and Elf, Amy Adams' role as Giselle ended up being a star-making turn that would catapult her career and turn her into a household name. Even with all of her success, though, it's never easy to revisit a role after 15 years, but in spite of all the issues this movie has, Amy Adams' acting is characteristically solid. Adams convincingly jumps back into this role with the same likability and charm as in the original, without ever missing a beat. She also easily transitions from being the naive Giselle and the wicked stepmother Giselle, which isn't surprising given the type of range she has as an actress. She also once again gets a chance to showcase her singing here, which of course she does very well. Well, that was the good. Now let's talk about the bad. Number 1. The story. The first movie was a well-written fish-out-of-the-water tale of an imaginary fairy tale character living in the real world. So much so that with its humor, wit, and likable cast, it was able to appeal to a wide audience and not just to kids. Even a cynic like myself was able to find the original at least mildly enjoyable because the premise and plot were straightforward, simple, and effective. Unfortunately, Disenchanted completely fumbles its story. Badly. For starters, we never really get to see enough of the new suburb before Giselle changes it with her magic wish. That's why when the town is in its new form, it doesn't really have much of an impact and therefore the stakes don't feel very high. Also, while having a few imaginary characters within the real world can work, having an entire town become imaginary doesn't quite work the same way. I understand how the writers probably thought that this reversal would be interesting, but this creative direction was actually a mistake. As opposed to the first movie, everything here becomes so detached from reality that aside from a few good scenes mainly carried by Amy Adams' acting, the viewer never really ends up caring about the story. Number 2. Location. One of the best ingredients of the first movie is the New York City setting, which includes on-location shoots, and this is sorely missed here in the sequel. In the original, seeing these imaginary fairy tale characters arrive in New York City and interact with local people sets up some great comedic situations. Prince Edward showing up at Times Square and telling people that they're peasants is genuinely amusing. Similarly, Giselle asking people in the subway for directions to her castle is funny too. The reason this actually works comedy-wise is because of the contrast between the fairy tale world and a real-world urban metropolis like New York City. It's also the exact type of place where you could actually see characters like this walking around in real life and just brush them off as local weirdos, nutjobs, or loonies. Combining fantasy characters with New York City is a true and tested idea that we've also seen in other movies like Splash and Elf, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The generic suburban town location of Disenchanted just seems dull and boring, and as a result, there's almost no comedy at all. Number 3. Male characters. Even though many of the characters we see in the sequel also appeared in the first movie, the writers don't quite know what to do with them here. In Enchanted, Patrick Dempsey is a grumpy and cynical lawyer, which is what makes his interaction with Giselle interesting. This movie doesn't really know what to do with him, which is why for the most part, he does absolutely nothing. James Marsden still manages to bring some sort of charm to the movie as Prince Edward, but we see him so briefly in this movie that it doesn't really have much impact. It's almost like the production ran out of money to pay him after one day of filming, so he left and never returned. Number 4. The villain. Even though Susan Sarandon is less known for acting these days and more known for activism, in 2007 she actually did give a good performance as the main villain. The problem with this movie is that it doesn't really have much of a villain, and sometimes we're not even sure who the villain is supposed to be. Between Giselle becoming a wicked stepmother and Maya Rudolph not ever seeming like a true major threat as her nemesis, this lack of focus manages to somehow lower the stakes even more. Number 5. Too much singing. Contrary to what you may remember, the first movie isn't a full-fledged musical, as the characters actually speak most of their dialogue. There are a few moments where Giselle sings, but it isn't overdone, and when it's used, it actually services the fairy tale aspect of the story. The sequel heavily relies on singing, though, in a way that is both less amusing and more annoying. I would have only given Amy Adams one song to sing and maybe Idina Menzel one song. While they're both fantastic singers, the amount of musical numbers in Disenchanted makes it seem less like a movie and more like a Broadway musical. I suspect that the writers knew they didn't have any good story ideas, so they just said, fuck it, let's just have them sing their dialogue. And while this show tune strategy may appeal to women and people that drink soy milk, I didn't enjoy it at all because I'm a dude. So basically, they changed the DNA of the movie to cover up for their shortcomings, and it mostly fails. Overall, this movie only highlights a bigger problem with the entertainment industry as a whole and Disney as a studio these days. While Disney has always been a for-profit company, they used to at least come up with their own family-friendly original properties from time to time. Now they either purchase IPs and run them into the ground, shove propaganda down people's throats, produce uninspired live-action remakes, or make unnecessary sequels. It doesn't surprise me that Disenchanted went direct to streaming on Disney+. They most likely knew that they had a stinker on their hands, so they dumped it on their streaming platform and hoped for the best. Unfortunately for Disney, Disenchanted hasn't been able to generate much of a buzz. Aside from a few random Twitter stans that said that they enjoyed it, for the most part, this seems like yet another Disney diminishing return. What did you think of Disenchanted? Did you like it as much as the original movie? Please let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and also clicking on that wonderful notification bell. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.